was a Tuesday evening in late September when David Johnson's life changed forever. The 32-year-old math teacher had just finished grading papers at Lincoln High School and decided to stop by the corner store for some milk and bread before heading home to his small apartment on Maple Street. David had been teaching at Lincoln for 6 years now. His students loved him because he made algebra seem less scary and always stayed after school to help anyone who was struggling. He coached the chess club too, and every Friday, you could find him in room 204 with a group of kids who had nowhere else to go, teaching them how knights moved and why protecting your queen mattered. The evening was crisp and cool. David pulled his jacket tighter as he walked out of Peterson's Market with his small bag of groceries. The streetlights had just turned on, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. He lived only 4 blocks away, a walk he had made hundreds of times before. The neighborhood was quiet and safe, filled with families who had lived there for years. David was thinking about tomorrow's lesson on quadratic equations when he heard the car door slam behind him. He didn't think much of it at first. People came and went from the market all the time. But then he heard heavy footsteps getting closer. "Hey, you there! Stop walking!" David turned around, confused. A police officer was approaching him quickly, his hand resting on his belt. The officer was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his early 40s, with graying hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to look right through David. "Can I help you, officer?" David asked politely, setting his grocery bag down on the sidewalk. "Officer Thompson," the man said, not offering a handshake. "I got a call about someone matching your description causing trouble in the area. I need to see some ID." David felt his heart rate pick up a little. He had been walking home from the store, nothing more. "I'm just heading home from buying groceries. I live just a few blocks away on Maple Street. I didn't ask where you live. I asked for ID." Thompson's voice was getting sharper. David slowly reached into his back pocket for his wallet, moving carefully and keeping his hands visible. He had heard too many stories about situations like this going wrong. "Here's my driver's license," he said, handing it over. Thompson looked at the license for a long time, much longer than necessary. "David Johnson, huh? What were you doing in that store?" "Buying groceries," David repeated, pointing to the bag at his feet. "Milk and bread. The receipt is in the bag if you want to see it." "Don't tell me what I want to see," Thompson snapped. "I'll decide what I need to check." David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. This wasn't going the way a normal police interaction should go. The officer seemed angry about something, but David couldn't figure out what. "Look, I'm a teacher at Lincoln High School," David said, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. "I work here in the neighborhood. I was just buying groceries and walking home." "A teacher?" Thompson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Right, and I'm the mayor. You people always have some story." Those 3 words hit David like a punch to the stomach. You people. He knew exactly what Thompson meant by that. "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong," David said quietly. "I showed you my ID. I told you what I was doing. Can I go home now?" "I'll decide when you can go," Thompson said, stepping closer. "Put your hands behind your back." "What? Why?" David's voice went up in surprise. "I haven't done anything." "You're resisting," Thompson shouted, even though David hadn't moved. "Put your hands behind your back now." David's mind was racing. This was escalating way too fast. He slowly raised his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "I'm not resisting anything. Please just tell me what you think I did wrong." But Thompson wasn't listening anymore. Something had switched in his eyes, like he had already decided how this was going to end. "Turn around now!" David turned around slowly, his hands still raised. He felt Thompson grab his wrists roughly and yank them down behind his back. The handcuffs were cold and tight, cutting into his skin. "This is unnecessary," David said, trying to stay calm even though his heart was pounding. "You can call the school. You can verify who I am." "Shut up," Thompson growled, pushing David forward toward the police car that was parked at the curb. What David didn't know was that Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived in the house across from the market, had been watching the whole thing from her living room window. She had seen David many times before, walking to and from the store, always polite and quiet. She knew he was one of the teachers from the high school because her grandson had been in his class 2 years ago. Mrs. Patterson had also seen Officer Thompson around the neighborhood before, and she didn't like what she had observed. There had been other incidents, other young men stopped for no good reason. She had always wondered if she should say something, but tonight was different. Tonight she decided to act. She quietly picked up her phone and started recording through her window. The streetlight gave her a clear view of everything happening on the sidewalk below. Meanwhile, David was trying to understand how buying milk and bread had turned into this nightmare. Thompson was searching through his grocery bag now as if expecting to find something criminal hidden in a loaf of wheat bread. "Where are the drugs?" Thompson demanded. "There are no drugs," David said, his voice getting stronger despite his fear. "I'm a teacher. I don't use drugs. I've never been arrested for anything in my life." Thompson slammed the grocery bag down on the hood of his car. "Don't lie to me. We got reports of drug dealing in this area, and you fit the description perfectly." David wanted to ask what description that could possibly be, but he was starting to understand that logic wasn't going to help him here. Thompson had made up his mind about who David was before he ever showed his ID. The next few minutes felt like hours. Thompson continued his search, becoming more aggressive when he found nothing. David tried to stay calm, tried to remember everything he had ever heard about how to survive an encounter like this. Don't argue. Don't resist. Stay alive and sort it out later. But Thompson seemed frustrated that his search was turning up nothing. David was exactly who he said he was, a teacher walking home from the store with groceries. There were no drugs, no weapons, no evidence of any crime at all. That's when things took a turn that would change everything. From her window, Mrs. Patterson watched as the situation spiraled out of control, her phone still recording every second. She had no idea that her decision to document what she was seeing would soon become the most important piece of evidence in a case that would rock their quiet neighborhood to its core. The evening that had started with lesson plans and grocery shopping was about to become something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. David woke up in a hospital bed with a splitting headache and no clear memory of how he got there. The white ceiling above him was spinning slightly, and when he tried to sit up, sharp pain shot through his ribs and left shoulder. His right eye felt swollen shut, and there was a bitter taste in his mouth that he couldn't identify. "Easy there, son. Don't try to move too fast." The voice belonged to Dr. Martinez, a kind-looking man in his 50s who was checking David's chart. "You've been unconscious for about 6 hours. You have a concussion, 3 bruised ribs, and some nasty cuts on your face and hands." The memories came flooding back in pieces. Officer Thompson. The handcuffs. The grocery bag scattered on the sidewalk. And then, David couldn't remember exactly what happened next, but his body told the story his mind couldn't piece together. "What happened to me?" David asked, his voice coming out raspy and weak. Dr. Martinez looked uncomfortable. "According to the police report, you resisted arrest and fell down some concrete steps during the struggle, but..." He paused and looked around the room to make sure they were alone. "But your injuries don't really match that story. These look more like you were hit repeatedly, not like you fell." David tried to process this information. "I didn't resist anything. I was just walking home from the store." "I believe you," Dr. Martinez said quietly. "And you're not the first person I've seen come in here with injuries like this after an encounter with that particular officer." A nurse knocked and entered the room. "Mr. Johnson, there are some people here to see you. Your principal, Mr. Harris, and a woman named Helen Patterson."
"Should I let them in?"
David nodded, though the movement made his head throb worse. He knew Mr. Harris would be worried about him, but he had no idea who Helen Patterson was. Mr. Harris entered first, his face showing a mixture of relief and anger. He was a tall, thin man who had been principal at Lincoln High for over 15 years. Behind him came an elderly white woman with silver hair and determined eyes, carrying what looked like a tablet computer. "David, thank God you're okay," Mr. Harris said, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "When I heard what happened, I couldn't believe it." "This is Mrs. Patterson," Mr. Harris continued, gesturing to the woman. "She lives across from Peterson's Market, and she has something very important to show you." Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her expression serious but kind. "Young man, I saw everything that happened to you last night. Every single thing, and I recorded it all on my phone." David's heart started beating faster. "You recorded it?" "I've been watching that Officer Thompson for months," Mrs. Patterson said, settling into another chair. "I've seen him stop young men in our neighborhood before, always men who look like you, and it never sat right with me. Last night, when I saw him approach you, something told me to start recording." She held up her tablet and showed David the screen. I got it all. The whole encounter. And honey, what he did to you had nothing to do with you falling down any steps. David watched the video with growing horror and disbelief. There he was, calm and cooperative, showing his ID, explaining that he was just walking home from the store. There was Thompson, aggressive from the very beginning, searching through groceries and becoming increasingly angry when he found nothing. But the worst part came at the end of the video. David watched himself standing handcuffed and helpless while Thompson, clearly frustrated that his search had turned up nothing, lost control completely. The video showed Thompson pushing David hard against the police car, then striking him repeatedly when David tried to protect himself. I don't remember most of that, David said, his voice barely a whisper. That's probably the concussion, Dr. Martinez explained. Head injuries can affect memory, especially of traumatic events. Mr. Harris was clenching his fists as he watched the video. This is assault, plain and simple. David, you need to file charges against this officer. But Mrs. Patterson held up her hand. There's more you need to know. After Officer Thompson, after he hurt you, he wrote up a completely different report. He claimed you were acting suspicious, that you ran when he tried to question you, and that you attacked him when he tried to arrest you. He said you fell down the steps outside the market during the struggle. David felt sick to his stomach. But that's all lies. Every word of it, Mrs. Patterson confirmed. And if I hadn't recorded what really happened, it would be your word against his. And we all know how that usually goes. Over the next few hours, more people came to visit David in the hospital. Teachers from Lincoln High brought flowers and cards from his students. His neighbor from the apartment next door brought him a change of clothes. Even some parents of kids he taught stopped by to check on him. But the most surprising visitor was Detective Rivera, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who worked for the Internal Affairs Division of the police department. Mr. Johnson, I'm here to investigate what happened to you last night, she said, showing him her badge. I want you to know that this department takes allegations of misconduct very seriously. David wanted to believe her, but after what he had been through, it was hard to trust anyone wearing a police uniform. Detective Rivera seemed to understand his hesitation. I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me everything you remember about last night. Don't worry about what's in Officer Thompson's report. I want to hear your version of events. David told her everything he could remember, with Mrs. Patterson filling in the gaps using her video. Detective Rivera took careful notes and asked detailed questions about Thompson's behavior and words. Has Officer Thompson ever approached you before last night? She asked. No, never. I'd never seen him before in my life. And you had no drugs, weapons, or anything illegal with you? Nothing. Just milk and bread from the store. Mrs. Patterson has video of the whole thing. Detective Rivera turned to Mrs. Patterson. Ma'am, I'm going to need a copy of that video for our investigation. This is potentially very serious evidence. Mrs. Patterson nodded. I already made copies and sent one to my grandson, who's a lawyer in the city. I wanted to make sure it didn't just disappear. After Detective Rivera left, David found himself alone with his thoughts for the first time since waking up. The reality of what had happened was starting to sink in. He had always known that incidents like this occurred, had seen the stories on the news, but he had never imagined it would happen to him. He thought about his students, especially the young black men in his classes who looked up to him. What would he tell them about this? How could he explain that sometimes doing everything right still wasn't enough to keep you safe? His phone had been buzzing all day with text messages from friends, family, and colleagues who had heard about what happened. The news was spreading quickly through their small community, and David realized that his private nightmare was about to become very public. Dr. Martinez returned that evening to check on him one more time before releasing him from the hospital. Your physical injuries will heal, the doctor said, but I want you to know that what you experienced was traumatic, and it's normal to have emotional effects from something like this. I'm going to give you some information about counselors who specialize in helping people who've been through police violence. David took the pamphlets. Though he wasn't sure he was ready to think about counseling yet, he just wanted to go home, grade some papers, and pretend this had all been a bad dream. But as he prepared to leave the hospital, David knew that his old life was over. The video Mrs. Patterson had recorded would soon change everything, not just for him, but for their entire community. The question was whether that change would lead to justice, or just more pain. Outside his hospital room window, the sun was setting on another day in the neighborhood where he had always felt safe. but David wondered if he would ever feel safe anywhere again. 3 weeks after David returned home from the hospital, Detective Rivera sat in her small office reviewing a stack of files that made her stomach turn. What had started as an investigation into one officer's conduct had uncovered something much bigger and more disturbing. The video from Mrs. Patterson had been just the beginning. Once word got out that Internal Affairs was investigating Officer Thompson, other people started coming forward with their own stories. Detective Rivera opened the first file. Michael Chen, age 28, stopped by Thompson 3 months ago while jogging in his own neighborhood. Thompson claimed Michael was acting suspicious and searched him thoroughly, finding nothing. Michael filed a complaint, but it was dismissed due to lack of evidence. The second file belonged to Anthony Williams, a 35-year-old father of 2 who worked at the local auto repair shop. Thompson had pulled him over for a broken taillight that turned out to be working perfectly fine. During the stop, Thompson searched Anthony's car without permission and made him wait on the side of the road for over an hour while backup arrived. No citation was issued and Anthony's complaint disappeared into the system. There were 8 more files just like these. All young men, all stopped by Thompson for reasons that didn't hold up under scrutiny. All dismissed or ignored when they tried to seek help through official channels. Detective Rivera had been a cop for 18 years, and she had seen bad officers before. But Thompson's pattern was particularly troubling because it had been going on for so long without anyone taking action. She picked up her phone and called Captain Brooks, her supervisor. "Captain, we need to talk about the Thompson case. It's bigger than we thought." An hour later, Rivera sat across from Captain Brooks in his office, spreading out the files she had collected. "How many complaints?" Captain Brooks asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer would be bad. 11 total, going back 2 years, all involving young men of color. All dismissed or filed away without proper investigation. Captain Brooks rubbed his temples. "And now we have video evidence of him assaulting a schoolteacher who was walking home with groceries." "It gets worse," Rivera continued. "I talked to some of the other officers who've worked with Thompson. 3 of them told me they've seen him lose his temper before, but they were afraid to report it because he has friends in high places." "What kind of friends?" "Sergeant Kelly, for one. They go way back, apparently served together before Kelly got promoted. And Lieutenant Morrison has been covering for Thompson's mistakes for years." Captain Brooks leaned back in his chair. This was the kind of situation that could destroy careers and bring unwanted attention to the entire department. Meanwhile, across town, David was struggling to get his life back to normal. The physical bruises had healed, but the emotional impact was proving much harder to overcome. He had returned to teaching the week after leaving the hospital, determined not to let Thompson's actions derail his career. But everything felt different now. When he walked to his car after school, he found himself looking over his shoulder. When he went to the store, he chose routes that avoided the corner where it all happened. His students noticed the change too. David had always been energetic and enthusiastic in class, but now he seemed distracted and tired. The chess club members asked if he was feeling okay. Even the principal had pulled him aside to check on his well-being. The worst part was the way some people in the community had reacted to the news. While most neighbors and colleagues had been supportive, David had overheard whispered conversations that made his blood boil. Maybe he was doing something suspicious, one parent had said at a school board meeting. "Police don't just stop people for no reason." "I heard he has a criminal record," another person claimed. Though David had never been arrested for anything in his life, these rumors hurt almost as much as the physical assault. David realized that no matter what the video showed, some people would always assume he must have done something to deserve what happened to him. But there were bright spots too. Mrs. Patterson had become an unexpected ally and friend. She stopped by his apartment regularly to check on him and had even started attending school board meetings to speak up when people made ignorant comments about the incident. "That boy is one of the finest young men I've ever met," she told anyone who would listen. "He teaches my grandson's friends and stays after school to help kids who need it." What happened to him was wrong, plain and simple. The video had also caught the attention of local news outlets. Reporter Jessica Kim from Channel 7 had done a story about David's case that highlighted the pattern of complaints against Thompson. The story had gone viral on social media, bringing both support and unwanted attention to David's situation. Civil rights attorney Carlos Rodriguez had reached out to David after seeing the news coverage. Rodriguez specialized in police misconduct cases and had a reputation for taking on difficult cases that other lawyers avoided. "Mr. Johnson, I've reviewed your case and I believe you have strong grounds for both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit," Rodriguez explained during their first meeting. "The video evidence is compelling, and the pattern of behavior Detective Rivera uncovered strengthens your case significantly." David wasn't sure he wanted to pursue legal action. The thought of going through a long court battle was exhausting, and he worried about the impact on his teaching career. "What if I just want this to go away?" David asked. Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair. "I understand that feeling, but think about this. If you don't hold Officer Thompson accountable, how many other people might go through what you experienced? Your case could prevent future victims." That night, David called his parents in Atlanta to discuss the lawyer's offer. His mother cried when he told her about Rodriguez's words. "Baby, I'm so proud of how you've handled this situation," she said through her tears. "But you have to do what feels right for you. Don't let anyone pressure you into anything." His father was more direct. "Son, I've seen too many cases like yours get swept under the rug. If you have a chance to make a difference, maybe you should take it." Back at the police station, Detective Rivera was making progress in her investigation, but she was also encountering resistance from within the department. Sergeant Kelly had called her into his office that morning with a clear message. "Don't make waves over this Thompson thing. He's a good cop who made a mistake. Let's handle it quietly and move on." But Rivera knew that what Thompson had done wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern of behavior that had been ignored for too long. She had also discovered something troubling in Thompson's personnel file. There had been a similar incident 5 years ago at his previous department in another state. A young man had been seriously injured during an arrest, and Thompson had left that job shortly after an internal investigation began. The previous department had given Thompson a positive recommendation when he applied for his current position. Despite knowing about the incident, it was a classic case of passing a problem officer to another department rather than dealing with the issue, properly Detective Rivera realized. She was uncovering a system that protected bad cops at the expense of the communities they were supposed to serve. The question was whether she would be allowed to see her investigation through to the end, or whether the pressure from above would force her to back down. As she prepared to interview Thompson directly for the first time, Rivera knew that the next few weeks would determine not just the outcome of David's case, but possibly the future of policing in their community. The truth was finally coming to light. But Rivera had learned that sometimes the truth wasn't enough. It would take courage from everyone involved to turn that truth into justice. David stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the third time. Today was the day he would testify in court against Officer Thompson, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. 6 months had passed since that night outside Peterson's Market, and the legal process had been more grueling than he ever imagined. Attorney Carlos Rodriguez had filed both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. But the path to justice had been filled with obstacles. Thompson's lawyer had tried every trick in the book to discredit David's character, digging into his past, questioning his motives, and even suggesting that he had staged the whole incident for financial gain. The worst part had been watching other victims back down under pressure. Of the 11 people Detective Rivera had identified as Thompson's previous victims, only 3 were willing to testify. The others were too scared, too tired, or too beaten down by the system to fight back. Michael Chen, the jogger who had been stopped 3 months before David, had initially agreed to testify. But after Thompson's supporters started showing up at his workplace and making threatening phone calls, Michael decided it wasn't worth the risk to his family's safety. Anthony Williams, the auto mechanic, had also planned to speak out until his employer suddenly fired him for unrelated performance issues. With a family to support and bills to pay, Anthony couldn't afford to continue fighting. But David had advantages the others didn't. His job as a teacher gave him some protection and credibility in the community. Mrs. Patterson's video provided undeniable evidence, and perhaps most importantly, the story had attracted enough media attention that backing down quietly was no longer an option. The courthouse was packed when David arrived that morning. Supporters filled one side of the gallery, Teachers from Lincoln High, parents of his students, neighbors, and civil rights activists who had traveled from other cities to show solidarity. On the other side sat Thompson's supporters, mostly police officers and their families, many wearing blue ribbons to show their support for law enforcement. The sight of so many uniformed officers staring at him made David's stomach churn. These were people who were supposed to protect and serve, but their presence felt more like intimidation than support. District Attorney Patricia Foster was prosecuting the case personally, which sent a strong message about how seriously the charges were being taken. Foster was known for her tough stance on police misconduct, and she had made it clear that this case would not be plea bargained away. "Mr. Johnson," Foster said as they prepared for his testimony, "I know this is difficult, but remember that you're not just speaking for yourself today. You're speaking for everyone who has been in your position, but didn't have video evidence to back up their story." When David took the witness stand, the courtroom fell silent. He looked out at the crowd and saw Mrs. Patterson in the front row, giving him an encouraging nod. Next to her sat his parents, who had driven up from Atlanta to support him. "Mr. Johnson," Foster began, "please tell the court what happened on the evening of September 24th. David took a deep breath and began his story. He spoke clearly and calmly, describing the ordinary evening that had turned into a nightmare. He explained how he had been walking home from buying groceries when Thompson approached him for no apparent reason. "Did you resist arrest or attempt to flee?" Foster asked. "No, ma'am. I cooperated completely. I showed him my ID, explained what I was doing, and followed all his instructions. I never raised my voice or made any threatening movements." Thompson's defense attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Stone, tried to rattle David during cross-examination. "Mr. Johnson, isn't it true that you had been drinking that evening?" "No, sir." "I don't drink alcohol." "But you had been at a bar earlier in the day, hadn't you?" "No, sir." "I was at school until 6 p.m. grading papers. Then I went directly to the store." Stone continued this line of questioning for nearly an hour, trying to poke holes in David's story or find some justification for Thompson's actions. But David remained calm and consistent, and his testimony was backed up by Mrs. Patterson's video. The most powerful moment came when the prosecution played the video for the jury. The courtroom was completely silent as everyone watched Thompson's unprovoked attack on David. Several jurors visibly winced when they saw Thompson strike David repeatedly while he was handcuffed, and defenseless Mrs. Patterson's testimony was equally compelling. The 72-year-old woman spoke with quiet dignity about what she had witnessed. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, she told the jury. "I know trouble when I see it. And David Johnson was not causing any trouble. He was just a young man walking home from the store, and Officer Thompson attacked him for no reason that I could see." The defense tried to suggest that Mrs. Patterson's video had been edited or manipulated, but expert analysis confirmed that the footage was authentic and unaltered. Dr. Martinez, the emergency room doctor who had treated David, testified about the severity of his injuries and explained why they were inconsistent with Thompson's claim that David had fallen downstairs. "In my medical opinion," Dr. Martinez stated, "these injuries were caused by repeated blunt force trauma, consistent with being struck multiple times. They are not consistent with a fall, Detective." Rivera's testimony revealed the pattern of complaints against Thompson and the department's failure to properly investigate previous incidents. "Over the course of my investigation," Rivera explained, "I found 11 similar complaints against Officer Thompson spanning 2 years. None of these complaints were properly investigated, and several victims were discouraged from pursuing their cases. But the most damaging testimony me from an unexpected source, Officer Janet Walsh, a 10-year veteran who had worked with Thompson on several occasions. Walsh had struggled with her decision to testify against a fellow officer, but her conscience wouldn't let her stay silent after seeing the video. "I witnessed Officer Thompson lose his temper on multiple occasions," Walsh told the court. "I saw him use excessive force during arrests, and I heard him make inappropriate comments about people in the community. I should have reported it sooner, and I regret that I didn't." Thompson's defense was built around the idea that he was a dedicated officer who had made a split-second decision under stressful circumstances. His lawyer painted him as a victim of a politically motivated prosecution. "Officer Thompson has served this community faithfully for 8 years, Stone argued. He was responding to reports of suspicious activity in the area, and when Mr. Johnson appeared to resist arrest, he used reasonable force to control the situation. But this narrative fell apart when the video clearly showed David cooperating fully and Thompson escalating the situation without justification. Thompson himself took the stand in his own defense, but his testimony was unconvincing. He claimed he had feared for his safety, despite the video showing David standing calmly with his hands visible. He insisted that David had been acting suspiciously, though he couldn't explain what specifically had been suspicious about walking home with groceries. During cross-examination, District Attorney Foster dismantled Thompson's story piece by piece. Officer Thompson, in your police report you stated that Mr. Johnson ran when you tried to question him. Is that what the video shows? Well, he was walking away. Walking or running, Officer Thompson? Walking, but he didn't stop when I called to him. The video shows that Mr. Johnson stopped and turned around immediately when you called to him, doesn't it? Thompson's face reddened. I guess so. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and the jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning with their verdict, guilty on all charges of assault under color of authority. When the verdict was read, David felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Justice had been served, but it had come at a tremendous cost. The community was divided, the police department was under scrutiny, and David's own life had been forever changed. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of supporters celebrated the verdict while Thompson's backers protested what they called a miscarriage of justice. David spoke briefly to the media, flanked by his parents and Mrs. Patterson. This verdict doesn't erase what happened to me, David said, but it sends a message that no one is above the law. I hope it prevents other people from going through what I experienced. The civil trial was still to come, but the criminal conviction had established the facts of the case. David knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time in months, he felt hopeful that real change might be possible. 2 years later, David stood at the podium in the Lincoln High School auditorium, looking out at an audience that included police officers, community leaders, students, and parents. The monthly community police dialogue meetings had become one of the most important events in their town, and David could hardly believe he was the one leading them. Officer Thompson had been sentenced to 3 years in prison and permanently barred from working in law enforcement. The civil trial had resulted in a significant settlement that David used to establish a scholarship fund for students who wanted to study criminal justice reform. But the real victory had been the changes that followed in the wake of his case. The police department had undergone a complete transformation under new leadership. Captain Brooks had been promoted to chief after the old chief resigned in the wake of the scandal. Detective Rivera now headed a new professional standards division, dedicated to investigating misconduct complaints and ensuring accountability. Good evening, everyone, David began, his voice steady and confident. 2 years ago, I never imagined I'd be standing here talking to police officers about community relations. But life has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be. In the audience, Mrs. Patterson smiled proudly from the front row. At 74, she had become something of a local celebrity, speaking at schools and community events about the importance of standing up for what's right. Her decision to record that night had changed everything, and she never let people forget that ordinary citizens had the power to make a difference. Chief Brooks sat in the second row, taking careful notes. The new chief had implemented sweeping reforms that made their department a model for other communities. All officers now wore body cameras that couldn't be turned off during interactions with the public. A civilian oversight board reviewed every complaint against officers. And most importantly, there was a new culture of accountability that encouraged good officers to speak up when they saw misconduct. Tonight, I want to talk about trust, David continued. Trust isn't something that can be demanded or legislated. It has to be earned through consistent actions over time. Officer Janet Walsh, who had testified against Thompson, was now a sergeant and head of the department's new community outreach division. Her courage in speaking the truth had cost her some friendships within the force, but it had also earned her the respect of the community and the new leadership. When Officer Walsh visits my classroom to talk to students about police work, David said, gesturing toward her, my students ask hard questions. They want to know why some officers abuse their power and how the police plan to prevent it from happening again. Officer Walsh doesn't give them easy answers or empty promises. She tells them the truth about the work that still needs to be done. The transformation hadn't been easy. Several officers had left the department rather than adapt to the new standards. Some community members remained skeptical that real change was possible. And David still struggled with moments of anxiety when he encountered police officers in everyday situations. But there had been genuine progress. Crime rates hadn't increased despite the reforms. In fact, they had gone down as community trust improved and more people became willing to cooperate with police investigations. Other police departments were studying their reforms and implementing similar changes in their own communities. Dr. Angela Foster, a psychology professor who specialized in trauma recovery, had helped David work through the emotional aftermath of his assault. She now served on the Civilian Oversight Board and had developed training programs to help officers recognize and address their own biases. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. Dr. Foster often told David during their sessions. It means learning to carry your experiences in a way that makes you stronger and more compassionate. David had taken those words to heart. He still taught math at Lincoln High, but he had also become a powerful advocate for police reform and criminal justice education. His students often said his classes had changed the way they thought about fairness and standing up for what's right. Tonight's meeting focused on a new initiative, a program that would pair police officers with community, mentors to build relationships outside of enforcement situations. Officer Rebecca Kim, a young Korean-American officer who had joined the force after the reforms, was partnering with Mr. Hassan, a local business owner who ran a youth center. The idea is simple, Officer Kim explained to the group. Instead of only interacting with the community during emergencies or when investigating crimes, we want to be part of the neighborhood fabric. Mr. Hassan is teaching me about the challenges facing immigrant families, and I'm helping him understand how police procedures work. Mr. Hassan nodded enthusiastically. Officer Kim comes to our youth basketball games and helps kids with their homework. When these young people see her as a person instead of just a uniform, it changes everything. Michael Chen, the jogger who had been too afraid to testify against Thompson, was now an active participant in the dialogue meetings. His confidence had grown as he saw real changes taking place. I was scared to speak up before, Michael admitted to the group, but now I believe that my voice matters and that the police department will listen when I have concerns. The evening's discussion was interrupted by a question from a teenager in the back of the room. Mr. Johnson, do you ever wish none of this had happened to you? David paused, considering the question carefully. It was something he had thought about many times. That's a hard question, he said finally. What happened to me was traumatic and wrong, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But if my experience helps prevent it from happening to someone else, then maybe there was a purpose to my pain. He looked around the room at the diverse group of people who had come together to build something better. 2 years ago, this room would have been divided into us versus them. Police on one side, community on the other, both suspicious and afraid of each other. Tonight we're all just neighbors trying to figure out how to keep each other safe. After the meeting ended, David walked through his old neighborhood toward Peterson's Market. He made this walk regularly now, not because he had to, but because he refused to let fear control his life. Mrs. Patterson was working in her garden when he passed her house. How did the meeting go tonight? She called out. Really well, David replied, stopping to chat. Officer Davis announced that they're expanding the mental health crisis response team. And the youth mentorship program is launching next month. Mrs. Patterson smiled and wiped her hands on her apron. You know, David, I've lived in this neighborhood for over 40 years and I've never seen anything like what's happened here. You turned something terrible into something beautiful. As David continued his walk, he reflected on how much had changed. The grocery store was the same, the streetlights cast the same shadows, but everything felt different now. What had once been a place of trauma had become a symbol of transformation. His phone buzzed with a text message from Carlos Rodriguez, his attorney, who had become a close friend over the past 2 years. Saw the news story about your community dialogue program. 3 more cities want to implement similar reforms. You're changing the world, one conversation at a time. David smiled as he read the message. He had never set out to become an activist or a public figure. He had just been a math teacher walking home from the store. But sometimes he realized the most important changes start with ordinary people who find the courage to do extraordinary things. When he reached his apartment, David found a stack of letters from students, community members, and people from other cities who had heard his story. One letter, from a young police officer in California, particularly moved him. Mr. Johnson, the letter read, "I became a police officer because I wanted to help people, but your story helped me understand that sometimes the greatest help I can provide is holding my fellow officers accountable. Thank you for showing me what real courage looks like." As David prepared for bed that night, he thought about tomorrow's algebra classes and the students who would be sitting in those desks. Some of them would face challenges and injustices in their lives. Some of them might become police officers themselves. All of them would have choices to make about what kind of people they wanted to be. His experience had taught him that change was possible, but it required people to care more about doing what was right than what was easy. It required Mrs. Patterson pressing record on her phone. It required Detective Rivera following the evidence wherever it led. It required Officer Walsh finding the courage to tell the truth. Most of all, it required ordinary people to believe that their actions mattered and that they had the power to make their communities better. David Johnson had learned that lesson the hard way, but he was determined to pass it on to everyone he met. The fight for justice never really ended, but neither did the possibility of hope.